What's up, guys? How's everybody what are you doing there?
I'm hanging from the bell. You know, the notification bell? The bell people should be clicking so they know when you make new videos? YouTube's subscribe system has been broken for years, and you've never thought to say anything about it?
Oh, I guess it is kind of broken. So I guess you guys should be clicking the bell notification icon, and this opening is now getting a lot longer than I'm comfortable with. It's usually about now that the opening scene comes and stops me from embarrassing myself. This video was brought to you by the wonderful people on screen here who support me over at Patreon. If you want to support this channel and what I do, then please check the link in the description or the link at the end of the video. Alrighty everybody, so I didn't get a chance to say it in the opening, but today we're going to be dealing with Creation Ministries again. You know, those guys that had a video that was nothing but quote mining where practically everything they said was taken out of context. I'll have the first two videos where I dealt with them in the description below. In the meantime though, let's go ahead and go to that one area of respite before we delve right into the madness. First we have an incredibly hulking Suris not taking really well to proselytizing by Hema, and then we have Raz keeping candy away from me by Spooky Boy Ray, and finally we have a strangely lewd encounter between me and my hammer from Jack and Quill. Alrighty, with that out of the way, let's get right into the video.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Matt Bondi. This week, we're going to spend the whole show examining the claim that young Earth creationists, or biblical creationists, are damaging Christianity because we ignore science.
You mean lying to your congregation is detrimental to the growth of your group? That's a new concept. I've literally never heard of that before.
Yeah, okay, that's quite a claim.
It is.
But it's really two claims, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Robert B. from the U.S., he wrote in claiming that creationists are harming Christianity, that's number one, and secondly, that we're ignoring science.
Right, okay, well, let's read what he wrote. It's not very long, and then we'll respond to his claims. So he said, or he wrote, "You are damaging Christianity deeply. You think science is wrong just where you need it to be, which should light up the warnings in your brain. The concepts that you list as evidence are areas you don't understand. Science primarily does not have opinions. It has data. Data that does not give a living," and there was a swear word there that we deleted out, "a living blank."
Because a swear word is so much worse than telling people that if they don't believe in your particular brand of God, they're going to burn forever. Offense over swear words is something that I've never really understood terribly well. There are certainly words that can be deemed offensive because they're, say, slurs against racial groups, but a simple swear word doesn't seem like something that really should be censored, because the only way that you would even know that that word is offensive is if you were taught that it's offensive. Meanwhile, a slur would routinely be used against you or another minority group, and you would be able to understand that that word is offensive without having to be taught explicitly that it's one of the no-no words. But let's continue with the email.
What anyone thinks. Soft tissue in dinosaur bones does not prove a young anything, and the scientists working on that material understand that where you don't. You would all be well advised to actually get into a real science program, though I doubt you could, and learn the material. I did.
Okay, so he continues, consider that the percentage of scientists who believe the Earth is young is smaller than the percentage of people who would be clinically insane in the same population. Alert! In order to claim that there is a debate at all, you will have to have more people on your side of the debate than the percentage of clinically insane. You don't. You have Kurt Wise disease. You are harming Christianity.
I almost wanted to jump on the person who wrote the email for a second there, because that was almost an appeal to populum, saying that because a few people believe one thing doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true, but then he corrected himself in the next sentence by saying that you would need a substantial amount of the population in order to actually have a debate. I would argue that that substantial amount of the population would also need to be scientifically literate, but that's just one observation. I wonder if these two almost caught the same thing.
Okay, all right, there's some pretty bold claims there. And the reason we want to examine this on the show today is that there are Christians, especially those who've gone through higher education, including most seminaries, who would make similar claims.
Right.
So you mean education leads to having a different perspective than the perspective that you have without being educated? Hot take, my dude.
Yeah, so the claim is that in order to take the Bible, and especially Genesis, at face value, the way we do as a ministry, you need to reject science. And by rejecting modern science, biblical creationists are harming Christianity because we appear to be anti-scientific.
Anti-scientific.
And lying to your congregation about it. Don't forget that. I literally just went over a young Earth creationist pastor who was telling his entire audience to be anti-vax. We've never given the NIFB points for being particularly smart, nor am I saying that Creation Live Ministries are part of the NIFB. But the beliefs do seem to be parallel.
Yeah. Just want to point out, and you probably picked this up as well, the tone of this email. You likely notice that it includes kind of an insulting, accusing tone. Now, not all people would have stated things in the way that Robert did in his email to us, but we often see that same kind of tone from people in the church who are convinced that the world is old.
Again, I don't see how this is surprising. People who are more well-educated than you seem to have a different opinion than you on a topic that they are educated on. And when you assert that your position is true because of something that doesn't support your position at all, then yeah, you're gonna get mocked a bit. The same thing has and would happen to me if I did similar.
Yeah, and for those of you who do understand that Genesis records a recent creation in 6 days, you might have had these kind of accusations leveled at you as well.
Right, yeah, and the idea is that, you know, we're anti-intellectual and it's only the low IQ, never finished high school kind of country bumpkin that would ever conclude that God created recently in 6 days and there was a global flood.
Right.
Oh, no. I don't think that that's the only explanation. You could be an uneducated person and therefore believe in a young Earth. You could also have never been educated on this topic but be incredibly smart in other areas, like, say, information technology. Being wrong about one thing doesn't make you stupid, but being stupid can make you wrong about more things. Stupidity or ignorance is certainly not the only explanation as to why someone would be a young Earth creationist, though.
You know, and just to give another example of that, we can play a portion of a radio show where William Lane Craig, who, by the way, has won many debates arguing against atheists.
Yeah.
But here he's commenting on a recent creation. So listen to this.
Yes, I've seen a comparable statistic that says that over 50% of evangelical pastors think that the world is less than 10,000 years old. Now, when you think about that, Kevin, that is just hugely embarrassing that over half of our ministers really believe that the universe is only around 10,000 years old. This is just scientifically, it's nonsense, and yet this is the view that the majority of our pastors hold. It's really quite shocking when you think about it.
Okay, so again, the accusation is that it's nonsense, he says, to believe that the world is less than 10,000 years old, and that it's embarrassing and shocking. And again, he's using those kinds of emotional words.
And there's nothing wrong with using those emotional words. No part of inserting emotion into an argument automatically makes the argument wrong. It may make it a bit fallacious, but his argument also was not an appeal to emotion. He was expressing his emotion at something he deemed as illogical. I may not have all the respect in the world for William Craig, and in fact, after his recent videos on Apologia, I've lost a lot of respect for him. But in this particular instance, he is not appealing to an emotion of any kind. He's simply expressing his, which honestly mirrors mine. The fact that over 50% of evangelical pastors teach young Earth creationism is a bit alarming, because it's through a denial of the efficacy of science that you end up denying other fruits that science has wrought, such as particular fruits in the medical field, which leads us to issues like faith healing. And you can argue that science denialism doesn't necessarily lead you down those routes, and it's a bit of a slippery slope for me to argue that, but this is a thing that has been demonstrated time and time again. A majority of your anti-vax group end up being evangelical Christians. Most of your flat earthers also end up being Christian as well. The big takeaway here, though, is that the Bible is a book of theology, not a book of science, and when you try to extrapolate science from that book, you end up in error more often than not. It's not a horrible book in and of itself. It has wonderful examples of literature that we still use today. Hell, even Richard Dawkins, of all people, argues this in The God Delusion, mentioning the literary efficacy of the Bible, and its resounding impact on culture all the years later. But it's when you try to divorce the Bible from what it's intended to be, literature, history, theology, and try to instead use it for something like science or mathematics, that you end up running into problems. These are the same problems you end up finding whenever you try to use the Bible as the ultimate arbiter of authority over morality as well, but anybody that argues that the Bible is a good source for morality is gonna end up in a really awkward spot anyways. It's when people like you guys try to use the Bible to dictate the morality of the modern times, or use it as a reference point for scientific literacy, that you end up making fools of yourselves. That's why you're getting emails with insulting or mocking tones. That's why someone like William Lane Craig is looking down on you. Not saying that drawing William Lane Craig's ire automatically means that you're wrong. Again, Apologia had a similar thing happen with him, and I would argue that Craig's wrong in that instance, but I hope you get my point.
And really the idea that the kind of flavor that comes across is that pastors who believe that, well, they're just out of touch with reality.
Right.
It's just a completely ridiculous thing to think.
Yeah. And he's disappointed that 50% of pastors believe that. Well,
Yeah.
I'm kind of disappointed that it's only 50%.
Of course you're disappointed that not more people have bought into the same lie you have.
You know, since the world really is less than 10,000 years old,
Yeah.
based on simple deduction from the Word of God.
Which isn't the litmus test we would use for any other scientific claim. This is what that email was talking about when it says that you only use science when it suits you and deny it when it doesn't. Young Earth creationism relies heavily on the Noah and Adam and Eve mythos being real and not just allegory. Clinging to your worldview even when every single facet of study that is framed around it shows that you're in error isn't exactly a sign of virtue. If I believed that outer space didn't exist outside of our atmosphere, and then was given conclusive evidence that it does in fact exist, which we do have, and I still denied that, I would not be a virtuous, stoic person. I would just be a moron.
Right?
What's really shocking and embarrassing is that 50% of pastors think it's older.
Right. I mean, pastors are supposed to give instruction from God's Word and instruct that way. But now, we've made a lot of statements here in the last couple of minutes that need further explanation, and we're going to do exactly that after a short break.
Oh, well, I guess I'll go ahead and use this time to insert my own ad break manually for the first time.
Okay, so if you just tuned in, this week we're looking into accusations made against CMI and really anyone who takes God's Word at face value. Understanding that God created recently.
Yes, and that's a big part of the response. What does the Bible say about the age of the earth? Many people think that it doesn't say anything about the age of the earth.
And those many people would be correct. The way that people use the Bible in order to try to get an age of the earth is by trying to track the genealogy of various groups of Israelites, coming up with a number that stacks up to the modern day at like 6,400 or so. But we don't use family lines for tracking the age of the earth. That's actually what we would consider a scope error. A scope error is a type of fallacy wherein you try to take something and apply it outside of its scope. Family genealogy can get you to the age of that family, how long it has been established in a particular region, but it cannot get you to the age of that region, outside of in, say, a cultural sense. You can use the genealogy of families in order to track where people were in different cultures at different times, but that's not going to tell you how old the crust and mantle under their feet were. That is where the scope error comes in. You're trying to use the age of families to determine the age of the earth. You've brought into the scope of genealogy research too far and come in error as a result.
Now, and we'll deal with that in a few minutes. Now, let's begin by going back through that email point by point.
Okay, so right at the start, after accusing us of damaging Christianity deeply, he says, you think science is wrong. Okay, so, and here goes the broken record again. We've said this so many times on the show, in Creation Magazine, on creation.com, in books and videos. It's not about the science.
Not about the science. We don't think science is wrong, as we're accused of thinking. In the sense of real operational science like chemistry and physics, we think that the materialistic philosophy of history masquerading as science is wrong.
Except we use physics to determine the age of the universe. We literally measure light particles in order to determine what the farthest star is, and that's how we've come to the age of the universe. That is an operational science that you yourself say that you don't deny the efficacy of. Moreover, the particular field that we use for determining the age of the Earth is that of radiometric dating. Well, it's more a method than a field, sorry. But it's through this method that we've been able to isolate various isotopes and determine what what their radioactive half-life is. It's through comparing these various radioisotopes that we can actually determine what the age of any given object is. For instance, if we're doing something like carbon dating, which is only usable for things that are up to about 50,000 years old, we know what carbon looks like when it is a certain age. We know exactly how much it has decayed if it's been around for, say, 2,000 years, and we can measure that decay in that particular radioisotope. By measuring that, we can then determine what the age of any given object is. If the given object, like say a sampling of a fossil, is older than 50,000 years, we have to use a different isotope that has a longer life. This is a very well-documented, well-researched, and very efficacious branch of science. It's not science masquerading as history, it's just science being science, and it's replicatable. It's only through the straw man of trying to represent it as science trying to be history that your argument even holds water.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody commenting on the origins debate anywhere, regardless of their position on the issues, from the biblical creationist to the atheistic evolutionist and everything in between, could get this one simple concept, right? That the debate is not about science. The debate doesn't happen at the level of science, it happens at the level of history. Right?
No, history is something that we've used for recording cultures, but whenever we're talking about the age of the Earth, we're not talking about history. Now you've jumped shark from a scope error, which is fairly simple and easy to do, to a full-on category error. The only way that the young Earth argument works in this sense is by reframing it as a historical argument, but that's categorically inappropriate, because the argument isn't about history. The argument is about geography and chemistry. For instance, the chemistry of uranium or potassium and how we can use those to determine the age of any particular item. That's how you determine the age of a material, and the Earth's crust and mantle are most certainly materials that we can measure. You're being really disingenuous by trying to reframe the argument in this way.
That's where it happens.
Yeah. Okay, so just to explain it one more time, the things that relate to origins or where things came from are not just about science. If we were to ask you, what is a scientific method? What does science involve? Most of you could get at least the basics. You might say things like, well, science involves making observations or doing experiments or things that are repeatable. Yeah. That's the science, and that is what science is.
That is what science is. Now if we ask, what's history all about? Well, I mean, most people are going to get that too, right? It's about past events. And some of you might feel your blood pressure rising at this point, recalling a past history test where you had to remember all those dates of critical events and so on. And history is about that.
And again, we have the dishonest framing at work here. So history is about past events, yes, but it is in particular about events framed around human affairs. It's the whole series of past events connected with someone or something. For us to determine anything about these events, they have to have been recorded. And for us to determine that, we usually have to have some semblance of culture and literacy amongst that culture for us to determine how that culture operated. This is why so much of history is framed around contemporary historians writing down points. Hell, the only reason we know as much as we do about the Roman Empire is because we have so many different documents from Plutarch. We also get a lot of history from oral traditions that get passed down and then recorded as documentation later. Most times, this ends up in those traditions being incredibly vague and not actually representative of the original events, but unfortunately without a time machine, that is how we have to deal with history. Speaking of which, I need to get to work on my next history episode. Sorry about that, guys. And Dangers of Woo. I've been really slack on that particular series. Anywho, point being, history itself only has a particular scope, and when you try to use it outside of its scope, you're gonna end up coming in error, again. We wouldn't use history for determining the age of a rock or a fossil. That's where the scientific method would come into play. Now we're gonna be dealing in the realm of chemistry, usually. Something that does have the age of materials within its scope.
The origins debate involves a mixture of science and history. It's not just science.
Right. You know, it's a lot like forensics. Forensics involve a mixture of science and history. So for example, at a crime scene, investigators might dust for fingerprints and collect hair or blood for DNA analysis. That's the science.
That's the science, that's right. But then a story is made up about how all the data from science and all the facts can be explained by a particular history. And some stories or histories will fit the facts better than others. You know, it's like the butler did it, or the maid did it, right? And that's that's where it goes on in the court. It goes to the courtroom scene near the end of the show. Different histories can be imagined to explain exactly the same data. The debate isn't over the data, it's over the history applied to the data.
And again, if this is the way that you want to frame the argument, 1, you're being incredibly dishonest, and 2, if we have an item that we've used uranium-lead dating, which has only about a 2 to 5% margin for error, and that item is shown to be, say, 60 million years old, since uranium-lead can date upwards of 2.5 billion years, then what history would you use for that item? How would you differently explain that? Because that seems to lead us with only a handful of options, and absolutely none of them are the item being less than 6,000 years old. The only way you could possibly do this is by saying that the scientific method here is wrong, and then you would have to start appealing to conspiracy theories about science being anti-Christian.
Yeah. And that's really similar to the creation, evolution, and age of the Earth debate.
Right.
In paleontology, for example, when scientists find fossils, they don't come with tags on them that say things like, "Hi, I'm 75 million years old, and I like to eat hamburgers, and I enjoy taking naps on Sunday afternoon after church."
Yeah.
None of that information comes from the fossil.
No. On the fossil itself and its surroundings there in the rock is where the science is done. It could all be documented very carefully. I suppose it could be tested chemically. And nobody disagrees with that because it's an observation. If you disagree, you go and do the experiment yourself. There it is. That's the science. There's no debate over that.
You're right, which is why there's no debate over the age of the Earth, except in very uneducated evangelical spaces, or spaces where indoctrination has taken over education. You know, like Pensacola Christian Academy and college, the places where I was taught young Earth creationism in my curriculum.
You know, it's like, look, there's a fossil. It's in the ground. Yeah, nobody debates that.
Right, exactly. But what makes the fossil much more interesting is, when did it die? How long was it alive?
Right.
What did it eat?
Yeah.
What was the social interaction with the other animals? How did this animal get encased in the rock? Those are the kinds of things that we really want to know about.
Yeah.
But the problem is, those things are not observations.
So you're going to argue that if I observe that the animal only has sharp teeth, has bones that are dense enough to support incredibly muscular forearms, and had legs that operationally would allow for travel of about 40 miles an hour, that the inference that this animal was a predator would be wrong? Because that's an observation from those bones. On top of that, if I were to use radiometric dating in order to isolate the isotopes needed in order to determine the age of the fossil, and I observed the decay rate of those radioisotopes, I would have, as you seem to be requiring, observed the data necessary to extrapolate the age and the behaviors of this animal. You don't have to be watching something in real time in order to say that it's observable. But anyways, their video is quite long, and I don't want to try to cover the entire thing in one video, so consider this a part 1. I'll be returning to these guys again here in a few days, so hopefully you guys will look forward to that. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. YouTube seems to be cutting me out of a lot of subscribers lately. I'm not exactly sure why, but any help with that would be appreciated. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you tomorrow, or in a video game stream later. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.